Hello, welcome to the self-learning platform by Dr. Sushma Singh. Today we are going to start Unit 1, Comparative Politics, Nature, Significance and Evolution. Now the point is the comparative method. Scholars are not agreed on comparative methods, its nature and scope. Some of them, like A.N. Anderson, argue that the term does not properly designate a specific method, but rather a special focus on cross societal, institutional, or macro societal aspect of societies and social analysis. Other like Aaron Lichbart hold that it is definitely a method, not just a convenient term vaguely symbolizing the focus of one's research interest, but it can be defined as one of the basic methods, the others being the experimental, statistical, and study methods of establishing general propositions. On the other hand, Harlord Laswell argues that for anyone with a scientific approach to political phenomena, the idea of an independent comparative method seems redundant because the scientific approach is unavoidably comparative. The Gabriel Almond also equates the comparative method with the scientific method. Yet it is essential to underline that scholars do recognize that the comparative method is a method of discovering empirical relationship among variables and not a method of measurement. The step of measuring variables is logically prior to the step of finding relationships among them. It is the second of these steps to which the term comparative methods refers. Finally, a distinction should be made between method and technique. The comparative method is a broad gauge general method, not a narrow specialized technique. It is in this vein that scholars refers to the method of comparison, or some prefer the term comparative approach because it lacks the preciseness to call it a method. The comparative method may also be thought of as a basic research strategy, in contrast with a mere tactical aid to research. The comparative method is best understood if briefly compared with the experimental, statistical, and case study method. The experimental method is used to understand the relationship between two variables in a controlled situation. Since such experiments are not possible in political science, an alternative is the statistical method, which entails the conceptual or mathematical manipulation of empirical data in order to discover controlled relationship among variables. It handles the problems of control by means of partial correlations or cross tabulations, that is, by dividing the sample into a number of different groups. For example, on the basis of age, income, education, etc., and looking at the correlation between the two selected variables in each. It has come to be accepted as a standard procedure and is applied almost automatically in empirical research. Thus, the statistical method is an approximation of the experimental method, as it uses the same logic. Therefore, comparative method essentially resembles the statistical method except that the number of cases in it deals with is often too small to permit statistical methods. But it is necessary to understand that the comparative method is not an adequate substitution for the experimental method, as in the natural science. But these weaknesses can be minimized in a number of ways. The statistical method is best to use as far as possible, except in cases where entire political systems are being compared. Then the comparative method has to be used. The two can also be used in combination. In this, comparative analysis is the first stage in which macro hypotheses are carefully formulated, usually covering the structural elements of total systems, and the statistical stage, the second, in which through micro replications these are tested in a large a sample as possible. Second, too much significance must not be attached to negative findings. For example, rejecting a hypothesis on the basis of one deviant case, especially when the sample is small. Rather, research should be aimed at probabilistic and not universal generalization. Third, it is necessary to increase the number of cases as much as possible. Is too small a sample which is not of much use. Comparative politics has advanced because of the formulation of universally applicable theories or grand theories based on the comparison of many countries or political phenomena within them. For example, structural functional analysis theory opened up a world of comparative research unknown before. Fourth, increase the number of variable if not the number of cases. Through this, more generalization are possible. Fifth, focus on comparable cases, that is, those that have a large number of comparable characteristics or variables, which one treats as consonants. But this is similar as far as those variables which one wants to relate to each other. This way we study the operative variables by either the statistical or comparative method. Here the area or regional approach is useful. For example, comparing countries within Latin America or Scandinavia or Asia. But many scholars have pointed out that this is merely a manageable argument, which should not become an imprisonment. Another alternative is studying reason within countries or studying them at different points of time, as the problem of control is much simpler as they are within the same federal structure. Here it may be mentioned that the states within the Indian Union provide a rich laboratory for comparative research that has not yet been undertaken. Finally, many scholars feel that focus should be on key or contextual variables, as too many variables can create problems. This not only allows manageability but also often leads to middle range theorizing or partial comparison of political systems. This has been used successfully in anthropological studies as tribal systems are simpler. Political scientists can also do this by limiting the number of variables. The case study method is used whenever only one case is being analyzed, but it is closely connected with the comparative method, and certain types of case studies can become an inherent part of the comparative method whenever an in-depth study of a variable is needed prior to the comparison with other similar ones. The scientific status of the case study method is somewhat ambiguous because science is neither generalizing nor a ground for disapproving an established generalization, but its value lies when used as a building block for making general propositions and even theory building in political science when a number of case studies on similar subject are carried out. Case studies can be of many types, for example, a theoretical or interpretative, theory confirming or infirming, each useful in specific situations. Thus, the comparative and the case study method have major drawbacks. Because of the inevitable limitations of these methods, it is the challenging task of the investigator in the field of comparative politics to apply these methods in such a way as to capitalize on their inherent strengths, and they can be useful instruments in scientific political inquiry. Many scholars have spent much of the post war period constantly improving the use of these methods. Now, the next point is contemporary significance. In the post war period, comparative politics had passed through many phases. In each of these, changes have been made and continue to be made by scholars. Comparative politics first focused on the input side, relying on political sociology, claiming that basic properties of political system were to be understood against background information about structure and processes in society. Thus, it was claimed that political conflict dimensions were structured according to cleavage dimensions in the social structure. This reductionist approach offset a reaction by political scientists such as Samuel Huntington, who argued for the autonomy of politics in relation to social and economic factors. Hence, the second stage in modern comparative politics aimed at institutional analysis of the variation of political system and their constituent parts such as parties and party system on their own right. Central to this were crucial distinction between different types of democracy, authoritarian rule, and modernizing politics. The shift was from democracy to order through stable institutions. Finally, the growing interest in the input side of politics within political science also affected comparative politics. Why study different political systems if it was not the case that politics matters for policies? This was also possible due to rediscovery of the centrality of the state, both in the right and the left of the spectrum. The third stage therefore implies a merger of comparative politics with public policy and political economy, attempting to understand what different political systems does and actually accomplish. This led to comparative policy. Those who emphasize the impact side typically refers to the impact of social cleavages. The basic problem being the extent to which environment determines the polity. The cleavage approach reducing politics to cleavage dimensions in the social structure seems an aggregating as institutionalism or the hypothesis that there is no relationship whatsoever between social and economic factors and the political system. But how does one strike a balance between social and economic determinism and political indeterminism or the new institutionalism? How, in the comparative analysis of the political system in various countries, can one identify crucial concepts with which are sought out in careful fashion, measure system differences and similarities? As the attempt to separate traditional developing and modern politics failed as a result of the value loaded nature of these concepts, the distinction between the democratic and authoritarian regimes became the fundamental one. However, even if there is unanimity as to the meaning and applicability of the term democracy, there is disagreement about the properties or indicators that identify a democratic regime. Two very different types of democratic models have been recognized: the Westminster type democracy versus the consensus or constitutional type of democracy. But how about the far larger set of non democratic systems? Today, we have more than 160 polities known as Third World, and there is as yet no agreement about the taxonomy of Third World politics. No doubt, much future comparative research will focus on the set of non democratic regimes in order to set out how they vary along a few basic dimensions. A major development of contemporary significance is the emergence of comparative analysis of public policy or political economy, which has since the mid 1970s added a new dimension to comparative politics. To the extent that it focuses on the output or outcome side of the black box of the political system, there is continuity from the past. The difference is a shift from grand comparative theory of political development and problems of modernization to a much narrower field of concentralization, namely the state and its central role in development. The change is from meta analysis to meso analysis, which focuses upon the linkage between the definition of problems, setting of agendas, decision making, and implementation processes. It has given comparative politics a more specific problem solving and policy orientation. Comparative politics remains multidisciplinary but has moved away from sociology and closer to the economics. It also signals a return to more normative concerns rather than a constant emphasis upon scientific methods. It has also re-established a link between academic political science and practitioners of public administration. Through public policy, a society is able to define the relationship between the production of goods and services along with the boundaries of what is possible given the constraint of resources but simply the question it asks are what is the appropriate public arena of the state vis-a-vis the private sphere and what kinds of policies lead to development. By comparative analysis of what states do within this public arena, it is able to theorize the appropriate sphere of the state. Consequently, public policy is descriptive, analytic, as well as prescriptive in its approach. Politics is now conceptualized as public choice among a number of alternative policies, and its goals is to integrate knowledge into an overarching discipline capable of analyzing public choice and decision making, and thereby contributing to the democratization of society. Political economy, more specifically, is concerned with the effect of political choices on the production and exchange of goods and services. It is an analysis of the consequences of political choices that political leaders make involving the polity's scarce resources. The value of approach lies in realizing that in developing societies, choices are really paths of development. The choice before leaders is through public policies to merely cope with, induce, or induced radical social and economic change. Therefore, within political economy, political development is redefined as the increasing capacity to meet and induce changing and expanding demands and generate resources to be able to do so. While political economy provides the theory, public policy is the method by which these can be put into action. The end results of all this has meant that the focus is on smaller comparisons or on what is possible. Middle range comparison today is more modest, focusing on a single reason or comparable set of reasons. In conclusion, the field of comparative politics has fragmented and no single definition of comparative politics exists. This has its merits. It means that it allows focus on what is significant and useful and not necessarily what is global and all encompassing as earlier. Let us have summary about the unit. In this unit, you have studied about the nature and evolution of comparative politics as a sub-discipline within the larger discipline of political science. Though it is one of the oldest forms in the study of politics, it has stimulated much interest in the post-Second World War period, making it relatively a new field. While the traditional approach was more parochial and monographic, the modern approach is wider in scope. It was successful in its attempt to analyze the rapid changes that have occurred in political institutions and processes and their shift from tradition to modernity. The second section of this unit focuses on the feasibility of the comparative method. Though various scholars do recognize the comparative method as a logical step, they differ in their opinions on its applicability, whether it is scientific, statistical, experimental, or merely a basic method. While the interpretations vary on this factor, efforts are on the improvement the use of these methods from time to time. The last section focuses on the contemporary relevance of comparative politics. Though the subject is multidisciplinary in character, the merger of this subdiscipline with public policy and political economy has added a new dimension in analyzing as to what different political systems do and accomplish, inputs and outputs of the policy. Thus, it establishes a linkage between the policy orientation, decision making, and implementation processes. Now we want to wind up today's lecture. Thank you so much for your attention.